Let me start with this simple question. What prompted you to get into the governor's race?
Yeah, well, thank you. You know, I am running for governor because I refuse to look the other way. While Ohio continues to go backwards on so many measures, people are struggling. And, you know, I was given the gift of getting to know Ohioans very, very well, both on air, as you saw during the pandemic, but in working with the governor, going everywhere in Ohio, and prior to that, as a doctor who has always worked in community, solving community problems. So, you know, I listen to Ohioans everywhere I go, and they're talking a lot about their struggles, costs right now. Obviously, the stock market this week is on everyone's mind. They talk about things like childcare, aging in place, being safe, having a feeling of safety, talking to a lot of small business owners, and over again, they help me realize that it's time that we need a change in Ohio. Our state house has been overrun by, you know, lobbyists and special interests. I don't think it's doing any party well. In fact, you know, I think problems at this point don't feel like they're a Republican or a Democratic issue. They're just problems that need solved. And so I'm running for governor because I believe it's time for a change.
If you were to earn the governorship, you know, you're not going to change the legislature that quickly. I mean, some say it's because of gerrymandering, some say these are the legislators that Ohioans want. I mean, you would be facing a legislature that would be, you know, vehemently opposed to probably anything you would want to do. How would you be able to deal with that? And is that good for Ohio to have that kind of deadlock?
You know, people everywhere I go are telling me that they're longing for change. They're longing for public servants who put our better good, who put solving problems, not making them, at the top of their agenda. And I think it's the beginning. I worked beside a governor, probably one of the few people who have had as much experience in the day-to-day, and that was well before anyone saw me in COVID. You know, the governor and I got an opiate settlement done. We learned from the tobacco settlement where a lot of money never went to help Ohioans. It actually filled potholes. And so we actually got a settlement with 88 counties where we got that money into an endowment so that we can treat addiction, you know, in perpetuity forever. And because you live off the interest. We dealt with PFAS in the water, tobacco issues, a hospital that had Legionella when it just opened. We dealt with uranium leaking from an old plant in Piketon, Ohio. And in that budget, you know, we know that people have to work on both sides of the aisle. I was able to get so much done, even with many of the legislators that we have today. But that said, we know it's time for a change. You know, it's not okay that Ohio used to be one of the healthiest states in the country. And right now we live much shorter lives. We're at the bottom, less healthy lives than all our neighboring states. We invented public education in this state, public education, which is something that saved my life as a child, having a rough childhood. And right now that's all under attack. Our gross domestic product, our growth in GDP in Ohio is 45th. And our biggest export is young people. So we've got a lot of work to do, and I feel that this, you know, isn't about Democratic or Republican. This is about breaking that stranglehold of the special interests.
You've talked a lot about your upbringing, and you've experienced homelessness as a child.
Yeah.
Kind of give me a quick, bullet points of what you went through, and more importantly, how that's affected you and how that's shaped you.
Well, you know, I've been open that I did have a rough childhood. I grew up in Youngstown, and up to the age of 12, did experience homelessness, a lot of abuse and neglect, and a lot of frequent flyer in the children's services system, and finally was removed at the age of 12. And what I can tell you is I moved basically a mile away, but stayed in one school for the next 7 years, and I actually got into Ohio's competitive BSMD program, so medical school right out of high school. But what I remember most is the kids that I left behind moved multiple times, constantly changing schools. And kids that were just as nice and just as smart, their lives took completely different trajectory. I didn't realize it then that I was learning that your zip code can predict on average how long you will live and what kind of life you will have, far more than your genetic code, everything I learned in med school. So, you know, for me, I remember the people, I remember parents who were even afraid to let their kids play with me, because when you're in poverty, in which many, many kids in our state remain in poverty, you're dirty, you seem different. But what I remember most are the people who didn't look the other way, who I wasn't invisible to, and people that would call my brother and I up on the porch to feed us breakfast when we were walking to school. And I know I'm not alone. I say this knowing that so many people have faced these things. In many of our cities right now, more than half of the kids are living in poverty. And that's why it's so important that we have a governor who listens to the people and puts the problems of what people are struggling with first and foremost, you know, not their ego, not their party even, but are about bringing people around the table. It's one of the things I'm gifted at, is having hard discussions, bringing people around the table with very different points of view to solve the things that are still standing in the way of the people of this state.
Let's talk about COVID, and that certainly, of course, is what I think most people know you for, as you were out front with the governor and all of that. Do you think that most people have a positive impression of you from that time, or a negative impression of you from that time?
Well, I can tell you that was an honor of a lifetime to serve. And everywhere I go in Ohio over these last 5 years, because as we're sitting here right at the 5-year anniversary, I get to hear people's stories of what they went through. I mostly hear stories of incredible heroism. I am so proud of what we did, the governor and I, you know, to lead in an unprecedented crisis like this. But I can tell you, it was the actions of Ohioans that helped save one another in those early weeks that you knew me. We flattened the curve in Ohio. We actually did. We have data that shows that. We were able to reopen faster than other states because we took quick, decisive, swift action, and we saved countless lives. That said, COVID is something that allowed another way for me to connect with people, and we have an overwhelming response everywhere we go. I mean, truly, just in Medina last week, you know, 200 people showed up and waited in line an hour and a half to talk. And that's the privilege I have of hearing from Ohioans. And we now have data, there are polls out there that aren't by our team that show that there was hate, and the hate is real, certainly. But what I saw in the state, I can't say enough, the love was so much greater than the hate.
And I don't mean to focus on that hate, but there are certainly critics out there. I mean, you know, you go on Twitter and, you know, when people, when there are tweets about you, it's like you hear tyrant, you hear unnecessary lockdowns, you hear, you know, damage to our kids and taking them out of schools. I mean, how do you respond to that? Are those people just off base, or are those, you know, how do you respond to that?
You know, first of all, when I have the privilege, again, because people feel that they can come up to me, maybe it's being a doctor and not a politician, people are pretty real with me. And I love hearing from them. I want to hear what they struggled with. I can't tell you the stories I hear from businesses, the hardships they faced, what they tried to do to keep their businesses open. And also often, like, thank you for what you were doing, because, you know, the governor and I were working so hard. We were working with every industry, every hour, to do everything we could to get Ohio open fast and move us forward. You know, we faced a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic where, in the beginning, if you went in the ICU right here in Columbus, and you were in the ICU, you had a 50% chance of dying. By June, that number was down to 5%. We were able to get our arms around it, following that playbook that George W. Bush first made after 9/11, realizing that a pandemic was the gravest risk to this country, to our security, because they knew already it would uncouple everything. The supply chain, our economy had completely crashed in this country before a single order was written. So everything we were doing was to try to solve how we would keep people alive and get back to our lives and get everything working as soon as we could. And in the beginning, in the very beginning, schools would still make that same choice. You know, we quickly gave the power back to communities over time. Of course, I wasn't running the response then, but in the beginning we had, you know, cafeteria workers, bus drivers, teachers, everyone at risk. And quite frankly, everything would close haphazardly, and our job was to help people keep kids learning, help stabilize schools so that we could get back in the classroom. And so I'm very proud of what we did in Ohio. I can't say enough. Our state rallied. I saw what we're capable of. And honestly, the hard problems we face in this world, whether it be housing or food or the economy or the stock market right now, you always need to do the same process. You need to put the hard cards on the table. And in Ohio, we were honest. We even said when we didn't know an answer. And you know what? People appreciated that because they know when politicians are being politicians, and they know when you care and you're doing everything you can for the people. And then the next thing you do is you do what we did, get the best experts around the table. We had them hour by hour to solve the hardest problems we face. And then you tell people that and you ask more of them. We asked a lot of the people of Ohio. The heroism was profound, and again, honor of a lifetime. And I hope, you know, as a leader, I would do it over and over.
Why did you step away? Was it because of the picketers? Was it because of the criticism?
Right. A lot of the media got it wrong on that. I'd like to say we had security risks from March on. When you first saw me on TV, I already had executive protection. The dark web, the plot against Gretchen Whitmer, that was against the governor and me as well. A malicious cell, actually based partly in Ohio. That said, that was there in the background. The whole time you saw me, I stepped down because, quite frankly, pressure began to come on the governor and me from the legislator, from others. Special interests wanting orders to be written for their special interest. People need to understand that the health director was given for 150 years quarantine powers so that it wouldn't be political. This is something you only use in emergencies. And pressure came for orders that were not scientific, quite frankly would have hurt and possibly killed Ohioans, from the Speaker of the House, Larry Householder. And it made no sense, and what I told the governor was, I will continue to advise you, which I have ever since, up to his last state of the state, but I can't sign my name. And so 2 weeks later, that the Speaker of the House was arrested on the largest scandal in Ohio's history.
Are you ready to be able to deal with that kind of
Yes.
politics again? Because
Yes.
you've still got a lot of those forces in the State House right now.
We sure do. And, you know, obviously gerrymandering passing, sort of the lawlessness of changing the language of something most Ohioans want. We know they do. We know people mistakenly voted no when they thought they were ending gerrymandering. You know, we have a lot of work ahead of us in Ohio to get rid of the corruption, to get rid of the special interests, and so, quite frankly, some complacency. And that said, there are many good people on both sides of the aisle who want to be public servants, who want to help raise the common purpose, want to govern out of common sense, believe still in the common good. I long for those leaders. Ohioans tell me they long for that. And I, quite frankly, you know, refuse to look the other way while these special interests continue to move us backwards as a state. We are capable of so much more than that. We have all the assets in the state to be the best at everything. And quite frankly, we have to begin a journey now to keep moving us in the right direction.
Anything to say about your possible opponents? At this point, 3 Republicans. You got Heather Hill, somebody who's never had office. You've got Vivek Ramaswamy, who, again, somebody who's never been involved in politics, and Dave Yost, who's been around for a while and is, you know, kind of, I don't want to say old guard, but, you know, traditional politician. Any thoughts on any of them?
Well, you know, I'm a doctor. I'm definitely not a politician, And I always say, you know, the last thing I would be useful for as a political pundit, but you know, I trust that the other side will make decisions, and I have put a challenge out there from when I first filed my paperwork that I hope both sides of the aisle will put forward these public servants and people who put the interests of Ohioans first. I mean, I think we will all benefit because these problems don't really care, like I said, if you're a Republican or a Democrat. That said, you know, I have concerns. It was an honor and a privilege to work beside the governor. We don't agree on every issue, nor should anyone. That is the brilliance of our democracy. But he and I were able to accomplish so much, even with the legislature before COVID came. I think when you sit down with people, someone from the other party, and you sit there and you talk about home visiting or lead poisoning in their kids' community, you can get to some answers. And what I can tell you is I will work tirelessly with anyone who put the interests of Ohioans first. I'm blessed to have learned how that works sitting alongside a governor day in and day out. And I will be honored to do it again and earn the trust of Ohioans.
And then this is, I think, my final question. Can a Democrat win a statewide office in this state? There are no Democrat statewide office holders right now. You can't say gerrymandering when it comes to the statewide offices because obviously they're statewide. Can a Democrat win the governorship?
You know, absolutely they can. Our state truly is functioning at our best. I think all of us love the color purple for a reason. We sense that there's something fair. We sense that that will get a diversity of thoughts around the table. And look, Democrats have won many races in Ohio. I'm running because I refuse to look the other way while we go backwards. I've watched many times I hear about women governors. We've had 3 women governors in Kansas. We're looking at a 3rd possibly in Michigan. So I am quite certain that women can win. And you know, for me, the response has just been overwhelming. Everywhere I go, and it has been this way, I've been going around listening deeply to Ohioans for months, if not years, in my public speaking. Everywhere I go, people come. I was at the Fraternal Order of the Eagles, like I said, in Medina, a very red county, just 2 weekends ago, and it was standing room only. You know, a couple hundred people came. And they too share my concern about the direction of Ohio. So I am quite hopeful that Ohioans are ready for a change. They're ready for public servants again. And it won't be just me. We need a lot of other folks stepping up to help lead the state forward. And I believe that future, that dream that I've had as a kid, look, I just want to say I was given every chance as a kid. But I'm very concerned that kids today are not being given the same chances. And I think all of us realize that all Ohioans deserve the chance to reach their full potential. And as a governor, I will spend every waking hour fighting for the people of this state.